When my stepsons laughed and said, "We only listen to our real dad," something in me went completely still. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was silence, the kind that settles deep in the body, a slow freezing that starts in the chest and spreads outward until even breathing feels like betrayal. I remember the room. The smell of dinner still in the air, the dull glow of the television flickering on their faces, the sound of their laughter folding into the walls. Owen was 15, Lucas 13. Old enough to know what they were saying. Old enough to mean it. "My name is Ryan. I'm 42 years old. For 9 years I lived under the illusion that I'd built a family. I see now that I was just patching up someone else's ruins, trying to build a home on ground already haunted. When I first met Emma, she was still shaking off the dust of her first marriage. She had this soft, exhausted smile, the kind that hides bruises you can't see. Her boys were small then, Owen barely out of kindergarten, Lucas still learning to tie his shoes. I remember that first evening, when she opened the door to her apartment and the boys ran between us like a current, laughing, shouting, unaware of the weight she carried. She apologized for the noise. I told her I liked it. I wasn't lying. I thought that was what life was supposed to sound like. Back then, Todd, their father, was just a shadow in her stories. He came around sometimes, she said, but never for long. He was the kind of man who could make promises sound like poetry. The boys adored him because he always left before the lies fell apart. A few visits a year, a handful of expensive gifts, a handful of photos for social media, that was the measure of his love. But I thought I could be different. I thought I could show them what staying looked like. After Emma and I married, I bought a small house outside Chicago, a quiet neighborhood, old trees lining the street like sentinels, a yard big enough for soccer goals, a porch where you could watch storms roll in from the west. I worked overtime at the firm to afford it. She cried when she saw it, said it felt like a fresh start. I wanted to believe that too. We filled the house piece by piece. Furniture from thrift stores, mismatched plates, curtains Emma sewed herself. I gave each boy a room, painted the walls the colors they chose. Owen picked navy blue. Lucas wanted green like the forest. I told myself it meant something, that these gestures mattered, that love was a matter of repetition. Lunches packed, bills paid, birthdays remembered, fences repaired. If I kept doing those things long enough, they'd know. They'd feel it. I paid for everything, the insurance, the clothes, the field trips, the braces. I was the one who took off work for dentist appointments and science fairs. Evenings we played board games, Sunday mornings I cooked pancakes, pretending it was normal to have laughter and syrup on the same table. On Christmas Eve we stayed up too late watching movies. On birthdays, I lit the candles while Emma filmed on her phone, her voice bright and shaky with happiness. Owen started calling me Dad around his 8th birthday. Lucas followed soon after. The first time it happened, we were at the lake skipping stones. "Your turn, Dad," Owen said, without hesitation, and I felt something inside me unfold, raw and new. It was the smallest word, but it filled the entire sky. For years, I lived inside that sound. I built everything around it. There were moments when the cracks showed, small hairline fractures that I brushed aside. The first time came when Lucas came home from a weekend at Todd's and refused to eat the dinner I'd made. "Dad makes better burgers," he said. He meant the other dad. I laughed it off, told him he must be lucky. But later that night, washing dishes alone, I caught my reflection in the window. A man smiling through humiliation. That was the beginning, though I didn't know it then. Still, I kept trying. That's the curse of men like me. We think persistence will fix what love can't. I worked harder, bought better gifts, took them camping, fishing, to every little league game I could find time for. I wanted to be the man they'd remember when they grew up, the one who never left. When they were little, they clung to me. Lucas used to hug me before bed, arms tight around my waist, saying goodnight in that half-sleepy mumble only children have. Owen used to wait for me at the window when I came home from work. I thought those moments meant something permanent. I didn't understand yet that children's love is weather, beautiful, temporary, and always changing direction with the wind. The years passed, and the illusion deepened. I started believing the story I told myself. that I had earned a place in their hearts, that I had rewritten the family's history. I wore that belief like armor. I needed it. Without it, everything I'd sacrificed, the overtime hours, the broken sleep, the years of carrying someone else's burdens, would have felt meaningless. I remember one night, standing in the backyard after mowing the lawn, sweat on my neck, listening to Emma laugh through the open kitchen window. The boys were arguing about something small, video games or chores, and her voice rose above theirs, calm and sweet. I thought to myself, this is what peace sounds like. I had no idea that peace was just quiet before the next fracture. Sometimes I'd find old photos of Todd tucked into drawers, beach trips, birthday parties, his arms around the boys. He was younger then, handsome in that unreliable way some men are. I'd stare at those pictures longer than I should have, trying to understand what they saw in him that they couldn't see in me. Emma always said, "He's their father, Ryan. You can't erase that." I told her I wasn't trying to erase it, but part of me was. I wanted to replace it. I wanted to be enough to make them forget. That was my sin, confusing love with conquest. I kept my faith in small things. School report cards on the fridge, Lucas scoring his first goal, Owen's high school acceptance letter. I stood behind every victory, invisible but proud. I thought that's what a father does, he stands behind. But there was always something off in the air. The way Emma hesitated before calling me their father in public. The way her parents still sent Christmas cards addressed to Emma and the boys, leaving my name as an afterthought. The way Todd's name still appeared on every school form, though he never showed up to a single meeting. I ignored it. I told myself it didn't matter, that what mattered was the day-to-day, the quiet persistence of care. Then came the night of the laughter, the night that ended the illusion. We were in the living room. I had asked Owen to take the trash out. He ignored me. I asked again. Lucas laughed, said, "We only listen to our real dad." And Owen nodded. That was it. Just a sentence. A small, sharp sentence that turned the air heavy and strange. Emma was in the kitchen, pretending not to hear. She didn't defend me. She didn't even look up. The boys kept laughing, unaware that something irreversible had just happened. I remember standing there, one hand still on the trash bag, the plastic crinkling in my grip. Everything in me wanted to shout, to demand respect, to remind them who paid for the house they lived in, the food they ate, the clothes on their backs. But I didn't say anything. I just stood there, feeling the silence spread like smoke. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake beside Emma, staring at the ceiling fan turning slow circles in the dark. The laughter replayed in my head, over and over, until it didn't sound like laughter anymore. It sounded like the cracking of something old and brittle. I realized then that all those years, all those small sacrifices, had been built on borrowed ground. I had mistaken dependence for love, politeness for belonging. I thought I had become their father, but I was just a tenant, paying rent in affection until the real owner came home. In the morning, I made coffee, packed their lunches, drove them to school like always. They talked in the back seat, voices bright and careless. Not a word about the night before. I forced a smile in the rearview mirror. But something in me had gone quiet for good. And though I didn't know it yet, that silence was the beginning of the end. I used to believe decay had a sound, the slow creak of wood, the whisper of rust. But when love rots, it doesn't make noise. It slips in quietly, like fog under a door. You don't notice it until everything inside smells different. That's how it began, the fading. Not with a fight, not with an explosion, but with laughter in the next room that didn't include me anymore. 3 years ago, Todd returned. He'd been gone for years. The occasional call, a few birthday texts, the kind of father who always promised next time. I had stopped thinking of him as real. He was an old photograph in a drawer, yellowed, irrelevant. But ghosts never stay buried when there's still something left to take. He showed up one Sunday afternoon in a car that cost more than the roof over our heads. Silver, polished, the kind of shine that announces itself before the man even steps out. He wore sunglasses though the sky was overcast, a watch that flashed every time he moved his hand. I was fixing the back gate when he pulled into the driveway. Emma came out of the house as if she'd been waiting. No surprise, no hesitation. Just that soft, familiar tilt of her head. The one she used to give me when I came home from work. The boys heard the engine and ran outside before I could wipe the grease from my palms. "Dad!" they shouted, the word ripping through the air like a flare. I froze. They hadn't called me that in weeks, maybe months. I hadn't noticed the silence until I heard the word again, aimed at someone else. Todd stepped out like a man stepping onto a stage. He hugged them both, lifted Lucas off the ground. I could see his reflection in the car door, that smirk of practiced ease. The boys surrounded him, all hands and questions, their voices bright, almost frantic. I stood by the fence, rag in hand, watching the man who'd returned to reclaim his audience. When he finally noticed me, he waved, like we were neighbors, not two men on opposite sides of a lie. "Ryan," he said, walking toward me. "Long time, huh?" His smile was the kind that asks for forgiveness without ever admitting guilt. I shook his hand, felt soft, the kind of softness that comes from never having to hold anything heavy. "Been busy," I said. My voice was even, but my chest felt tight. He glanced at the house. "You've done well for them. Looks good." I wanted to say yes, I have. I wanted to list every bill, every sleepless night, every scraped knee and hospital visit he'd missed. But I didn't. I just nodded. He didn't need to hear it. He'd already taken the credit the moment he drove in. That evening, Emma said he'd be around more often. For the boys. She said it like it was good news. I didn't argue. There are moments in marriage when silence is the only and you're allowed to keep. At first, he came on weekends, then weekdays. Always unannounced, always with something in his hands, new shoes, game consoles, tickets to water parks, restaurant dinners. He was the fun version of fatherhood, the kind that doesn't cost effort, only money and timing. The boys started living for those visits. They'd wait by the window when he texted he was coming, ignoring everything else. When he was late, they'd sulk. When he canceled, they'd blame me, as if I'd somehow made him disappear again. Emma said it was natural. "They've missed their father," she told me. "It's good for them to have both of you." Both. A word meant to include, but it divided everything. The shift happened gradually. The boys started comparing things, my rules versus his, my tone versus his. "Dad doesn't make us do chores," Owen said once, when I asked him to mow the lawn. Lucas added, "Dad says weekends are for fun." I asked which dad they meant. Neither answered. It became routine, small defiance, casual disrespect, the slow erosion of a voice that used to matter. Emma pretended not to notice. I think part of her was relieved. Maybe she thought if Todd was back, she wouldn't have to feel guilty for moving on. Maybe she was tired of being the bridge between us all. The house changed too. Little things. Photos of Todd began to reappear. One on Lucas's dresser, another on Owen's nightstand. When I opened the hall closet, I found a framed picture of the four of them at some amusement park. My hands shook as I put it back. I couldn't remember ever taking a photo that happy with them. Todd began showing up at family gatherings, birthdays, barbecues, even Thanksgiving. He arrived loud, confident, filling the space with jokes and stories, his arms always around the boys. He'd call Emma, like no time had passed, like the years she spent rebuilding herself didn't exist. She'd smile politely, not enough to betray herself, but enough to tell me she didn't mind. And me? I stood in the background, carving the turkey, refilling drinks, playing host in a house that no longer felt like mine. Once, during a barbecue, Todd raised his glass and said, "Couldn't have done it without you, man. Thanks for taking care of my family." Everyone laughed. It was meant as a compliment, but it felt like a eulogy. The boys didn't look at me. They looked at him. Their father had returned from the dead, and I was just the man who'd kept his seat warm. That night, Emma tried to comfort me. "Don't take it personally," she said. "They're just excited." "Excited," I repeated. The word felt foreign in my mouth. She touched my arm. "They'll always love you too, Ryan." "Too," I said. "That's the part that hurts." She went quiet after that. She knew. We both did. The balance had shifted, and no amount of patience could tilt it back. The boys began calling me Ryan again. The first time it happened, Owen slipped, or maybe he didn't. We were in the kitchen. I asked him to clean up the dishes. "Sure, Ryan," he said, casual as a shrug. Emma didn't correct him. Neither did I. I just nodded and walked out of the room. After that, the name stuck. It spread like mold, quiet, invisible, until it was everywhere. The strange how quickly absence becomes normal. Within weeks, they stopped seeking me out. Dinner conversations drifted around me like I wasn't there. I'd try to join in, only to have my words die under the weight of their silence. Even my gestures, the chores, the repairs, the quiet acts of care, started feeling intrusive, unwelcome. Every hammer strike, every faucet fixed, sounded like I was forcing myself into a place I no longer belonged. One evening, I came home from work and found Todd's car in the driveway again. Through the window, I saw them, the boys and Emma on the couch, laughing at some story he was telling. The sound spilled out through the open window, bright and effortless. I stood outside for a long time, the house glowing warm behind the glass, before finally walking away. I drove aimlessly that night, through neighborhoods where no one knew my name. In the following months, everything blurred. The boys stopped asking me for help with homework, with rides, with anything. When the bills came, I paid them without thinking, the way a man keeps watering a dead plant out of habit. Emma's gratitude became thinner too, polite, distant. The kind of thank you you give a stranger holding a door. The final fracture came one weekend in late autumn. We were sitting at dinner. Todd had joined us again. Uninvited, though Emma insisted it was nice to keep things civil. He talked all evening about his new job, his new apartment, the vacations he planned to take the boys on next summer. I barely spoke. Near the end of the meal, Lucas looked up and said, "You know, Dad, maybe we can go without Ryan next time. He doesn't really like that kind of stuff." The table went silent. Todd glanced at me, half apologetic, half smug. Emma looked down at her plate. I waited for someone to say something, anything, but no one did. So I finished my drink, stood up, and cleared the dishes. As I stood at the sink, I realized the sound of running water was louder than the family behind me. I had become background noise, necessary, but unseen. Later that night, I heard Emma and the boys laughing softly upstairs while I sat in the dark living room. I stared at the empty chairs, at the table we'd once filled with board games and plans. I felt the weight of all I had built, the mortgage, the bills, the routines, and realized none of it was mine. I was just maintenance, a caretaker for someone else's story. That's when something in me began to turn cold. Not hateful, just clear. The kind of clarity that comes when you finally understand that love without respect is a leash, and I had been the one holding it, tightening it around my own throat. There comes a moment in every man's life when silence stops being peace and becomes a verdict. For months I had lived inside that silence, the one that hung in every room of the house, thick as dust, heavy as regret. Emma and the boys had grown comfortable with it. They thought it meant I had accepted my place, that I would keep funding the show while the script erased me line by line. But silence has a way of collecting interest. One day it comes due. It happened on a Thursday night. The house smelled of reheated pasta, the kind of dinner you make when you've stopped caring about ritual. The boys sat at the table with their heads down, phones glowing in their hands, the light flickering across their faces like confession lamps. Emma sat opposite me, scrolling through something, her wine glass half empty. Could have been any night. That was the cruel part. Betrayal never chooses ceremony. Owen was the first to speak. "We've been talking," he said, his voice flat but rehearsed, the way teenagers sound when they're about to say something cruel but think they're being brave. Lucas nodded beside him, not looking up. I waited. My fork hovered above the plate. Owen cleared his throat. "We think you owe Dad an apology." The word Dad hung there like smoke. For a second, I thought I'd misheard. "An apology," I said. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "Yeah," Lucas added, finally meeting my eyes. "For pretending to be him all these years. for acting like you were our father." Emma's head was still lowered. Her silence was a signature at the bottom of their statement. I looked at her. "Is this your idea?" She shook her head, eyes fixed on the table. "They came to me earlier. They just need honesty, Ryan. Closure. Closure." That was the word she chose. As if this were therapy. As if 9 years of my life could be summarized in a polite apology. For a long moment, I just sat there, watching the candle flicker between us. I thought about every bill I'd paid, every long night spent fixing what they broke, every time I'd been the wall they leaned on when their real father vanished again. I thought of the day I signed the mortgage, of Owen's graduation, of Lucas's broken wrist and the hospital waiting room where I sat alone, praying he'd be okay. And then I said the only 2 words that still belonged to me. "All right." They looked relieved, like they'd won. Owen leaned back in his chair, Lucas exhaled. Emma looked up for the first time, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. She didn't understand yet. None of them did, because all right wasn't surrender. It was decision. After dinner, I cleared the plates. They didn't thank me. They never did. Upstairs, I could hear laughter. The kind of brittle, victorious sound that always follows cruelty disguised as courage. I washed the dishes one by one, dried them, placed them neatly in the cupboard. My hands were steady. They had to be. I'd spent years holding everything together. Now I was preparing to let it fall apart. When the house finally went quiet, I sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop. The screen's glow cut through the dark like a blade. I opened folders, finances, bills, insurance, subscriptions, phone plans, tuition accounts. Every password came easily. I had memorized them the way a priest memorizes prayers. For 9 years, every line of this family's survival had run through me. I had been the current that kept the lights on. That night, I pulled the plug. First, the cards. Owen's college fund closed. Lucas's soccer academy canceled. The joint account locked. Then the utilities, the streaming services, the car payments, the phones. Every comfort they took for granted, every invisible kindness. Click by click, I rewrote the foundation of our house into nothing. I wasn't angry. I was precise. I moved with the calm of a surgeon removing a tumor. At one point, I caught my reflection in the screen, hollow-eyed, expressionless. A man stripped down to his truth. I didn't look vengeful. I looked free. When I was done, I drafted one final message. Short, clean. To Todd. Pick up your family package. I read it once before pressing send. No anger, no punctuation beyond the period. It was the calmest thing I'd written in years. Sleep came easily after that. Shouldn't have. But exhaustion can masquerade as peace when you've been carrying too much for too long. When dawn came, the house was still. I made coffee, sat on the porch, listened to the faint hum of traffic beyond the trees. The sun touched the lawn, golden and indifferent. It looked like an ordinary morning, but inside, the machinery of dependency had already collapsed. By noon, the fallout began. Emma's voice broke first. She was at the kitchen counter, phone pressed to her ear, eyes wide with panic. "The account's empty," she whispered, as if the words themselves might restore the balance. "Ryan, did you?" I sipped my coffee. "Yes." She blinked. "Yes, what?" "I closed them." Her face drained of color. "You what? You can't just, how are we supposed to?" "You told me I owed him an apology," I said quietly. "This is it." Owen came down the stairs a moment later, his phone in his hand, his voice sharp. "My tuition payment bounced. The portal says, funds unavailable. What the hell did you do?" Lucas followed, pale, holding his soccer bag. "They said my academy payment didn't go through. I can't play until it's fixed." I looked at them both. "You'll have to ask your real father." Owen stared at me like I'd spoken another language. "You can't be serious." "I'm exactly serious." Emma's voice shook. "Ryan, stop this. Please. You're not punishing him, you're punishing the boys." "No," I said. "I'm releasing them. From the illusion. From me." Owen's hand trembled around his phone. "You're ruining everything." You're just bitter because we told you the truth. I stood up, slowly. Then live in that truth. The room fell silent. The only sound was the coffee machine dripping behind me, slow and steady, like a clock counting down. A week later, everything they'd built on my back began to crumble. Without my payments, the mortgage defaulted. Emma's credit tied to mine buckled. The boys' accounts froze. The car was repossessed. The house, my house, slipped into foreclosure. Todd came once, swagger dulled, trying to fix what he didn't understand. He lasted 3 days before vanishing again, leaving behind half-empty promises and unpaid bills. That was when Emma stopped calling me cruel and started calling me necessary. The calls came late at night, soft at first, then desperate. Ryan, please, just help us get through this month. The boys miss you. You made your point, but I didn't answer. I'd spent 9 years trying to be enough. Now it was their turn to learn what enough really meant. Some nights I'd drive past the old house. The lawn had grown wild, the windows dark. It didn't hurt like I thought it would. It looked honest, stripped of its illusion, like me. I told no one about the message I'd sent Todd, about the night I erased my name from their lives. Some truths are meant to be carried in silence, not confessed. But if you've ever been loved for what you give and not who you are, you'll understand why I did it. People think revenge is loud. Shouting, broken glass, slammed doors. It isn't. Revenge is the sound of a man closing a laptop, finishing his coffee, and walking out the door without looking back. That night at the table, when I said all right, they thought they'd won. But the truth is, that was the moment I stopped losing. The weeks after I left were colorless. No rage, no noise, just the thin hum of absence filling every room I passed through. I had packed light. A few shirts, the old wristwatch my father left me, and a box of photographs I couldn't bring myself to burn. Everything else, furniture, memories, debt, I abandoned like a shed skin. When I closed the front door for the last time, the latch clicked with the precision of a clock striking the hour. 9 years to the day. I drove south until the skyline of Chicago vanished in the mirror, the city shrinking to a bruise of light on the horizon. By the time I reached Austin, the radio had gone silent and my thoughts had become the only voice left. I rented a 1-bedroom apartment above a mechanic's shop. The walls smelled faintly of oil and rain. At night, when the engines below fell quiet, I could hear the sound of trains somewhere in the distance. It was the first sound in months that didn't demand anything from me. People imagine freedom as motion, wind, open road, laughter. But real freedom is stillness. It's the moment you realize no one is waiting for you to fix what they broke. The first weeks I worked like a man possessed. Construction sites, warehouse shifts, anything that kept my hands occupied and my head empty. Hard labor is honest. Concrete doesn't lie. When the sun burned my shoulders, I thought of the nights I'd spent hunched over spreadsheets, keeping a family solvent while they measured my worth in silence. Sweat felt cleaner than compromise. At night, I wrote letters I never sent. One for each of them. For Emma, you mistook endurance for love. For Owen, I hope the world teaches you respect before it teaches you hunger. For Lucas, I wish I'd met you again in another life, one where I was allowed to matter. Each letter ended the same way. Take care of yourself. I already did. Then I tore them up, fed them to the sink, and watched the ink bleed away. Months passed before the first real letter arrived. The envelope bore my name in Emma's handwriting. Still neat, still cautious. Inside, apologies lined like confessions. She wrote that she finally understood what I had carried, that Todd was gone again, that the boys were angry and lost. She said the house was being sold, the debts mounting, the boys looking for work. You were the spine we broke, she wrote. I folded the letter carefully, slid it back into its envelope, and placed it in the drawer with my unpaid receipts. Some balances aren't meant to be settled. 2 weeks later came another envelope, smaller, smudged with fingerprints. Lucas's handwriting, crooked, hurried. We miss you. Mom cries at night. Owen says he hates you, but he doesn't. I think you were right about Dad. He promised things again and didn't show. The words leaned across the page, half boy, half man. I stared at them for a long time before setting the letter beside his mother's. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't reopen the wound. Still, some nights I caught myself listening for their voices through the thin apartment walls, the way one listens for ghosts. Silence answers, always. It reminds you that absence is also a kind of loyalty, the only one left unbroken. I saw a photograph of them once, months later, by accident. A coworker scrolling through social media, a friend of a friend. There they were. Emma and the boys in front of a rented house, smaller, duller, the smiles rehearsed. Todd was gone again. Emma looked older, the boys harder. They wore that expression people get when they've learned that comfort can vanish overnight. I felt no triumph, only confirmation. Justice isn't joy, it's the absence of debt. Sometimes, walking home from work, I pass families on porches. Fathers flipping burgers, kids shouting, wives laughing. For a heartbeat, something tightens in my chest. Then it passes. I remind myself that love without respect is a contract written in disappearing ink. I once signed it. Never again. There's a diner I go to every Sunday morning. The waitress, Ruth, calls me Han, and never asks about my past. She knows the kind of silence a man carries when he's done explaining himself. I sit by the window, coffee black, eggs over hard, and watch the city wake. No phones buzzing, no accusations, no one measuring my worth in what I can provide. Just the scrape of forks, the hiss of bacon, the small mercy of being ordinary. One morning she asked if I had family around here. I told her no. Then, after a pause, I added, "Not anymore." She nodded like she'd heard that answer 1,000 times. Maybe she had. Half the men who pass through that diner are ghosts wearing work boots. The seasons shifted. Winter crept in slow, mild by Texas standards, but sharp enough to sting. I kept the letters in the drawer, unopened after that first reading. I imagined the boys growing older, learning the arithmetic of consequence. Maybe they blamed me. Maybe they blamed Todd. It didn't matter. Blame is a luxury for those who've never been invisible. One night, almost a year after I left, a knock echoed through the apartment. I opened the door expecting the landlord, maybe a neighbor. It was Owen. Older, thinner, the arrogance stripped from his face. He stood in the hallway holding a cheap duffel bag, rain dripping from his jacket. He didn't speak at first. When he finally did, his voice was small. "I just wanted to see you." I stepped aside. He didn't come in. He just looked past me into the apartment. Bare walls, one chair, one table, and nodded like he understood. "I get it now," he said. Then he turned and walked away before I could answer. The echo of his footsteps followed me for days. After that, I stopped wondering whether I'd been right or wrong. Morality is something the comfortable debate. For the rest of us, it's simple math. How much of yourself you can give before there's nothing left to spend. Sometimes I drive out to the lake on my days off. Not the one near Chicago, but it smells the same: wet pine, motor oil, the metallic tang of water hitting stone. I sit on the pier and watch the sun burn its path across the surface. The quiet feels honest. It doesn't ask forgiveness. It just is. I think about the house sometimes, the laughter that used to fill it, the moments that felt real even if they weren't. I don't regret them. Regret belongs to people who still hope to be forgiven. What I feel is gratitude. For the lesson, for the clarity, for the silence that finally speaks the truth. Because that's what the end of a family really sounds like. Not shouting, not slamming doors, but the soft click of understanding. The sound of a man setting down the weight he carried and walking away without turning back. I never remarried. I don't think I will. Love, to me, is a form of memory now, a quiet museum I visit when the nights get long. I walk its halls carefully, reading the plaques, reminding myself what each exhibit cost. Then I lock the doors again. They say time heals everything. It doesn't. It only teaches you how to live with the scar. I wear mine openly. It reminds me that I once mistook obligation for belonging, patience for virtue, and love for gratitude. Now I know better. I'm not the hero of this story. Maybe not even the victim. I'm just the man who stopped paying for his own disappearance. So tell me, if you had given 9 years, your money, your faith, your name, and they laughed in your face, what would you have done? Would you have stayed, waiting for respect that would never come? Or would you have done what I did? Close the account, count the cost, and walk away into the quiet? Because in the end, peace doesn't come from forgiveness. It comes from finally hearing nothing at all.